Welcome to this episode of In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of WCTV. Glad you're able to join me for what I think is going to be a very interesting conversation. I have actually been looking forward to this conversation for a number of weeks, even though I didn't know it was going to really happen a few weeks ago, but I was hopeful. Just because there is so much swirling around us, there is an individual in the community, there are many individuals in the community that have different perspectives, but this person, it seems, is involved in a lot of things. But we will get to our guest in just a minute. One of the things that I need to remind you of is it is time to register to vote. We are less than 90 days before our next election. Unless you've been under a really big rock, you should be aware of that. And we're not just talking about the national races. There should be, we hope, school board races taking place. There will be a race for the clerk's office. There will actually even be a contested race for coroner here in Wayne County. So this is the general election, so we do ask you to get registered. Very easy to do. From the comfort of your home, pick up your phone, your tablet, whatever, and go to indianavoters.com. You can check your status, you can register, you can see your polling places, everything you need to know. You don't have to leave home, you don't have to mask up, just be right there, very comfortable. indianavoters.com, that is where you want to go. I am going to dip right into this because I have a feeling that if we were to make this one of those very rare 90-minute conversations, we could probably fill that time, but I'm not going to do that. I wanted to talk to this person, Aaron Stevens, because he is a lifelong resident of Richmond. He is a school board member and has been since 1997, and he is a Richmond police officer and has been since 1986. And beyond that, he is also host of the Cuffs program here on WGTV Channel 11. So when I say he's kind of got his fingers in a lot of different places, and I'm sure he is very involved in other things in the community that I did not mention, but we'll get to a lot of that. And I do want to say up front, even though we're going to talk about school board, we're going to talk about the police department and some other things, Aaron is not representing any of those organizations. Aaron is just here as an individual, as a friend, and agreed to kind of sit in and go through this exercise with me. So Aaron, first of all, thank you very much. We've never had a chance to really do this.
No, Eric, and thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of In Focus. I've listened to your show many times. It's funny. I listen to your show, you host my show, and all the good things. But I think this is going to be a unique experience for both of us. And to remind the public that, as Eric prefaced this, I am not speaking as a police officer. I'm not speaking as a school board member. I'm speaking as a citizen of this community that I love and I've lived in all my life.
Okay. We're going to get into a lot of different things, but obviously there has been a lot going on in our community, outside of our community. So I want to start by asking if there is anything before I ask my first question that you just kind of want to say. Is there anything that the Spirit is moving you to just speak before you start answering some of my questions?
Well, I will lead. I'm glad you said it. The Spirit moves me because my answers are going to be based upon, I hope, personal experiences guided by compassion, the way that I was taught to engage with people and to accept things in life and to understand things in life. And in my life, most of those situations are guided by prayer. And so I'm hoping that I not offend anyone with anything that I say. But again, it's a personal perspective based upon the 59 and a half years that I've lived on this earth and my teachings, my upbringings, and my personal experiences.
Okay. Let's start with the school board. Let's start with schools in general. You're a member of the Richmond Community School Board, and as I mentioned, have been since 1997. The beginning of this school year is like no other in my lifetime. I'm sure nothing like it from your perspective, either as a student or as a board member or as a community member. Talk a little bit about how you see the beginning of this year, are we, when we're talking about students going back to school, are we looking at and talking about the right things?
There have been so many engaging conversations over the last number of weeks in particular. I know that the Board of Trustees for Richmond Community Schools and the administration have revisited upon, after receiving a lot of information from the community, revisited the reopening plan that was, even at last night's the school board meeting of August the 5th, it was determined that the plan in place would continue on. And realistically, Eric, there is no perfect plan. There is none. Whether it was bodies in seats or doing virtual education for a month or doing half and half, there is no perfect plan, because on December 31st, 2019, nobody envisioned what was going to transpire in the late winter and early spring of 2020. That has led us to this point in our lives, in our careers, in our businesses, in our communities everywhere. So when it comes to education in Richmond, we're going ahead with the full knowledge that at any moment of any day, our plans that are in place right now could change based upon circumstances, and in the fact that no one has a crystal ball and that God hasn't come down and told us this is the way it must be done. We have tried to reach a solution that is going to best serve families and kids, and especially protect our students and our teachers and staff in our school buildings. School starts next week, and by the end of next week, we may have to revamp and go a different direction.
What's going to drive that conversation? What's going to drive that decision?
It's going to be the experiences from every classroom, every building, every teacher, every student, that feedback that we're going to get immediately once boots are on the ground next Wednesday. It's going to start immediately from there. Did the buses run smoothly? And if so, were there any problems with students who may have previously been exposed to COVID-19 or family members of those students? Because as individuals have eloquently stated, one student on a bus could eventually and ultimately lead to quarantine or restrictions on the driver. If there are 20 other kids on that, that's, that student plus 20 other kids, the bus driver, their families, it just goes on. It's a total domino effect. And we have seen, paying close attention to school corporations around the state of Indiana over the last couple of weeks who have opened early, and those in bordering states, how they are handling exposure issues. We have had some that opened up with bodies in chairs who, due to exposures, have drawn back and have said, okay, we're going to do virtual for the next month. Again, our current superintendent, Jennifer O'Brien, and her administration that she has in place right now are doing a yeoman's job with monitoring every iota of concern every day. So again, in Richmond Community Schools, we'll do what is best for the students, for the families of the students, for the teachers, for the administrators as well. That is, as of today's date, August the 6th. Who knows what tomorrow's going to bring? So
you've been sitting on the school board and talking to teachers, talking to parents, talking to students for a number of years. Discuss how you think what we're going through right now might help make education in the long run better, or do you think it can?
That's a very interesting question, because what was my normal life and what was normalcy with education, public education, private education, is out the door. Will never be the same at this point. You know, 150 years ago, when education was being done in single-story buildings, and there may be 30 kids in there, and you know, ages 6 through 18 or whatever, no one could have envisioned in 1875 what was going to be happening in 2020. You know, because most of the things that we see every day were never even thought of back then. So when it comes to public education and the future of it, this is going to be the crucial time when families and students and administrators and school boards and everyone collectively and individually come together and say, we're going to have to look at the future, which is right now, learn from immediate mistakes that may happen, which may include reopening plans or the way that we deal with individuals in classrooms and the delivery of education in classrooms. And we're going to have to say, nah, you know, there will never be again traditional education. It may be free thinking of, realistically, I think that maybe if we do not overcome the pandemic within the next 6 months or a year, we may be looking at education not in buildings, but in different remote locations, isolation, and completely computerized.
As you look around Richmond Community Schools, a place that you have spent a great deal of time, graduations, basketball games, class, I've seen through the years that I've been here, and I'm not native to Richmond, I didn't go to Richmond High School, fewer teachers, administrators of color. I've even had some conversations with other school board members about the lack of administrators, teachers of color. When you look at that, and I know we're trying to get to a colorblind society, but we're not there yet. When you look at that and think about some of the people who I've heard were teaching when you came through school and you saw them as mentors, how do you feel that the kids there now, kids of color there now, don't have some of those mentors, some of those faces, some of those people that they can say, okay, I want to be like that person. I want to achieve what that person has done.
Eric, it's very interesting because I work in a profession in law enforcement that mirrors what school corporations are also facing. I'm proud to say I'm a member of a profession that's one of the two of the most important professions in our country today. That's the profession of the police officer, the law enforcement officer, and that of the classroom teacher. And both of those. You know,
there's some firefighters out there that aren't going to be happy with that answer.
That's okay. You know, they're not. I love my firefighter brothers, you know. And, you know, and aside to that, why did God make police officers? So firefighters could have heroes. But, yeah, I said that. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you were at IU East right now, the phone would be ringing off the hook, I'm sure.
Probably.
In law enforcement, it's difficult today getting people of color, specifically African-American men and women, to apply. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, later. In public education, when it comes to Richmond, Indiana, when I first started my formal education in the late 1960s at Fairview Elementary School, there were a large number of African-American teachers, men and women alike, serving Richmond Community Schools. That number has dwindled for a number of reasons, I believe. Lack of pay and incentive for teachers in public education. Lack of appreciation for teachers in public education. You know, for someone to say in 2020, I want to grow up and I want to be a classroom teacher, says a lot about the person, because to be a teacher today in this society, with all the different mandates that are going out that handcuff teachers on a day-to-day basis, with limited funding and everything that's going on right now, if you want to become a teacher, you have got to, I take that as a true calling. Not everybody should be a teacher, and those who go into public education today, I honor them, I respect them, I exalt them, because it takes a true calling to do that. Now, when it comes to having people of color in Richmond, Indiana, it has been difficult. I know that over the last 10, 12 years, there has been a concerted effort to identify and to recruit people of color to come to Richmond. One of the difficulties is, if you were to go to Atlanta, Georgia, or someplace in South where you have a lot of historically black colleges, those teachers, those graduates who go into public education want to go to cities that have great opportunities for people of color, whether it be entertainment, entertainment, religion, or other avenues that person is going to blend in. Once they leave the classroom, they're going to be able to go out to the public and meld in with other people who look like them, sound like them, teach like them, worship like them, laugh like them, and engage in other opportunities like them. We may not yet in this community have that abounding that is going to draw someone from Chicago or even Indianapolis to come to say, I want to come to Richmond, Indiana and teach. So what we are going to have to do earnestly as a school corporation, as a community, what can we do to incentivize people of color to say, hey, I'm going to give Richmond, Indiana a choice. We have problems here in Richmond. We have a crime problem, okay? Let's be real about that. But this is still a relatively safe community to come and work in, to raise a family in, to shop, to eat, to own a home, and to live in. And again, reminding everyone who watches this, we do have problems in Richmond, and drug issues are a big problem in our community. However, when it comes to you, Eric, or me, well, I'm going to put myself in a different boat, but you or someone else who's watching this, your chances of being the victim of a violent act of crime or criminal activity are very small, because those violent acts that we have, 90+% of the time, the victim and the suspect are connected in some way. So I bring that into perspective with this thought of how do we recruit people of color to Richmond to come and be our educators, to teach the next generation of young people. And that is, we have got to sell Richmond. And one of those things is our geographic location is ideal. If you want to raise a family and have a safe environment, come to Richmond, Indiana. I mean, if you want a big city perspective, remember, you're only 55 minutes away from Indianapolis. You're 35 minutes from Dayton, Ohio. You're an hour and 20 minutes from Columbus, Ohio. You're 2 hours away from Louisville, Kentucky. You're 3 hours away from Chicago. You can go to these places, spend a day, spend 2 days, and come back home to the safety of Richmond, Indiana, because our crime rates are far greater or less than any of those cities that I just previously mentioned. You can have your cake and eat it too. Go someplace, enjoy the environment that you seek after, but come back here to a safe environment. Now, as we look forward to the future and recruiting people of color, again, incentivizing them, we've got to develop a greater relationship with realtors, with our business, from all aspects of our community to say, hey, listen, we're courting someone of color who could have an immediate impact on our student population in Richmond, Indiana, specifically our young people of color. And we need you to partner with them so we can have incentives for home purchases, for loans, and everything else to get them here. Once we get them here, this community has got to embrace them. Our churches and everybody else have got to roll out the red carpet and say, welcome to Richmond. We want this to be your home, not just today, but for the long term, because our young people are depending on you.
I see this as bad as this pandemic is. I see this as an opportunity for the community to do some of that recruiting. We're looking to build. We've had a population decline since the 70s. We're trying to rebuild our population. We're trying to do it with younger people interested in starting a family. I would think that if there was going to be an opportunity to start that recruitment, this would be that time. Am I wrong in that thinking?
No, you're not. Eric, back in 1988, there was a automotive group that wanted to come to Richmond, Indiana. And I remember back then, we had two opportunities within a 5-year period of time to have two automobile manufacturers move to this area. It starts with this, the way that we think of ourselves. How does our community look at ourselves, and how do we promote Richmond without being negative? Because if you speak negative things, only negative things come out and you receive negative things. But if you speak positive things, that spreads like a wildfire. And out of this pandemic, we all need to look and see how we are coming together as individuals and as a community to see what is in front of us and see how can I be a part of a better solution that will make this a very positive future for our community. Not just in our schools, but in our businesses, in our neighborhoods, and everything else. And it starts with each of us.
In your mind, how do we treat teachers? We say we hold them up. We say that they are heroes. And again, you see it from a couple of different perspectives. Do we treat, in general, teachers the way that we speak about them?
In my heart, no. And the reason I say that is we have 400 plus teachers, employees of Richmond Community Schools. Everything from the bus driver up to the superintendent, but especially the classroom teacher, they deliver. I don't think the public fully understands the relevance and the importance of the classroom teacher in today's world, because they have to deliver a message and train up that child with the educational opportunity that is going to inspire that kid not only to stay in school, but to become a good citizen, to become a good son or daughter, to become a good student, and propel them to understand that education is the foundation of their future. We don't do enough to publicly adore and lift up our teachers. I can speak it from my podium every 2 weeks in a school board setting. But it doesn't fall on every ear. It doesn't fall on every teacher's ear. It doesn't fall on every community member, every mother and father who says, wow, maybe I really haven't looked closely enough at the difficulties that teachers face, yet my son and daughter is learning and they can now spell and they can now read. I owe that to that classroom teacher. So until our community, individually and collectively, understands the relevance and the role and the importance of that classroom teacher, no. And a lot of them do it knowing that maybe I'll never get rich at this, but if I can make the difference in the life of one child every day, then that's the reward that I get. And like I said, if you're going to be a classroom teacher today, it is a calling, it is a mission, and basically to some extent, coming from this perspective, it's also a ministry to that extent.
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're spending some time with Aaron Stevens. Thanks for being here. I really do appreciate it. You named two occupations that were incredibly difficult: teaching and law enforcement. Law enforcement is one that, once again, and it comes and goes, but once again is under a microscope. I saw a picture, and it's probably been 5 weeks ago now, And you may have seen a picture, that same picture or a picture like it. It was a young man, Caucasian, standing in front of a black police officer at one of the demonstrations, yelling at him, literally up in his face. And I found it interesting because I can only imagine, and I can truly only imagine, what that officer was thinking at that time. You have spent most of your adult life as a police officer. You have seen the protests that have come through Richmond. Black Lives Matter, arguing that there is excessive force used by some police officers. On election night, I made the statement that it was up to police officers who normally come into the community and say, when you see something, say something. On election night, I suggested that it was time that our police officers use that line on themselves. Was I off base with that?
No, nope, not at all. Dating myself, back in late 60s, early 70s, the Osmonds made a song, "One bad apple don't spoil a whole bunch." Well, that is wrong. One apple does spoil the whole bunch. And unfortunately, it is the misdeeds, the criminal acts of police officers in cities far away that unfortunately spoil the way that we are perceived in the public. Not all police officers abuse their authority. Not all police officers are overly aggressive. Not all police officers demean people simply because of the color of their skin or the way that they look or their socioeconomic status. But it's the one or the two or the three or the four in places far away who wear colors different than mine, wear different colored uniforms than mine, have badges that are different shaped than mine. If they do it in Minnesota, then we all are held accountable for it. And I would say that in general, I would venture to say 95+% of police officers do so with the right intention. That is to serve and to protect their communities, their neighborhoods, and to be servants to every citizen and in the communities that they serve and for the departments that they serve. I also will add that not everybody who wears a badge should ever wear a badge. The mindset of the person goes to determine how they are going to respond to people, not just people of color, but people in need. I take to heart the fact that, you know, for these 34 and a half years that I've been a police officer, I came from a foundation of God and family, guided by the teachings of my parents and everything else, where diversity was something that I came to know as a child because of the composition of my family and everything else. So, you know, I remember even this far into the game that I call my career, that we treat people the way that we should be treated. Now, mind you, yeah, I can flip a script in a heartbeat, you know, based upon the way that I am treated by that person I just maybe want to have a consensual conversation with on a vehicle stop or something else. However, you know, going back to the focus of the question, the dilemma that we face today is caused by the unprofessional acts of a few. And we in Richmond, Indiana, and I would have to say, I hope our public is paying attention to a couple of things. Richmond, Indiana does it right. You know, we've had a couple of peaceful protests, and I wish that the CNN, the NBCs, the ABCs, and every other news network had been in Richmond, Indiana to see how people can come together and have a peaceful protest with dignity and respect and still get a message across without there being violence, loud voices, harsh encounters, and everything else. Richmond, Indiana, and the people who have organized our peaceful protest have done it right. And those who have participated in it, boom, you did it right. But I also want to thank our police officers, too, who held the ground to make sure that those people who were there, sometimes protesting police officers, were protected, so that there was not going to be any engagement that was going to lessen the message of the protest, but also create a threat to those people who had the right to protest. So, we've done it right here. One thing, too, our public should be aware of, that in the last 5 or 6 years, our department has gotten completely, basically, half of the department is turned over with a number of new officers on there.
Yeah.
A lot of those officers are coming from military backgrounds. A lot of them have had combat experiences. We have a new breed of officers that have gone through the baptism of fire and being shot at, seeing friends killed and everything else, who have depended upon the person next to them on the firing lines, walking down streets of Fallujah and other places in the Middle East, and knowing that the person next to them, a person of color, an African-American male or female, has got their back. And when you're in that combat zone, there is no time for racism or prejudices, because that person next to you may be the one to save your life. We have now a large number of officers on our department who bring that same mentality. And I've seen them. I trained a lot of them, and I've seen them, the way that they engage with our people of color, our young men and women on the streets. And I'm proud to say our community is going to be well served for the next number of years by these new officers. At the same time, every one of them and every one of us understands that we have got to go now above and beyond professionalism to ensure that what happened in Minneapolis, Minnesota does not happen here. What happened in Ferguson does not happen here. And so that's where we are today with our police department and our young officers.
When you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, what comes to mind?
I'm angry to an extent.
Why?
Because Black lives have always mattered. Everybody else's life matters too, but Black lives matter and have always mattered. And my anger is from this standpoint, Eric. Until we as people of color, as Black people, respect ourselves and respect each other as Black people, then when we stop committing violent acts against each other, why should anybody else feel that our lives matter? I had a conversation recently with some ministers from Indianapolis, and we were speaking specifically about the growing acts of violence in Indianapolis and the growing number of Black-on-Black crimes in Indianapolis. And for all the conversations that they have with the chief of police and with police officers there in Indianapolis, again, it comes down to this: Black lives matter. But until I as a Black man, you as a Black man, that woman as a Black female, that person as a Black child, until we realize our importance to each other, founded on respect and understanding and communication, I am not going to kick my brother or my sister in the back. I am not going to steal from them. I'm not going to try and solve a problem with a knife or a gun. Until we hold ourselves accountable for our actions, then no one else is really going to say Black Lives Matter. You and I can preach Black Lives Matter based on the color of our skin all day long, but we have also got to live it amongst each other. That's where my anger raises up. And it's not mad at anyone. It's mad at the fact that we're not yet at the point where we're really going to hold each other accountable to make ourselves matter to each other. Does that make sense?
It does, but how do we get to that point when we're still having the conversation with the community, where there are so many people who, even with the watered down history that we are taught in school.
Let's go back to recruitment of teachers, and let's go back to a redevelopment of a curriculum in public education that actually teaches about the history of Black people in the United States. Okay, go ahead, Larry. Eric,
you agree with me that it's not there, but even what is taught is 400 years of slavery. It is police officers being used against the Black community until with those conversations being the lead, with death being the lead. How do you think we reach that point? We've marched, we've shouted, we've screamed, we've prayed. It's been peaceful, it's been not. And it still comes back to, even as with what you're saying, it still comes back to us, regardless of the fact that, and you've probably had it, you walk into a store, not in your uniform and not in Richmond, Indiana, where most people know you, and the looks that come across people's faces, the stops that some police officers make because you're not in a place they think you should be. You're driving a car they don't think you should or could own. How do we love ourselves when the majority see us as something completely different? How do you put that back on us? Just as a question.
I'm laughing, Eric, because I call it suspiciously Black. You heard it here first, okay? Suspiciously Black. And you're right. You know, I've been places around the country that I've gotten stares and stares because what's he doing here? You know, seeming out of place in the mindset and the eyes of those people who are looking at me. Have I ever been followed in a department store because of the color of my skin? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I really appreciate the look on my face, on the faces of those individuals when I turn around and I say, by the way, as a police officer, I'm telling you, you're doing this the wrong way on following me. And I show them a badge and they're like, oh, well, I didn't know. I said, well, it shouldn't matter because why are you following me? And I'm dressed, you know, in a very conservative manner. Yet the person over there who doesn't look like me is probably one still in front of you. Now that brings up an anger, but I do so with a smile on my face. I'm sorry, Eric, I got off point with your question. What do we do? I think some of the things that made our Black community strong throughout the history and kept us together, families and churches, we're not seeing as much of them connected anymore. And I know that we used to always be able to go to church and there was that strength. How do we do that today? We need to have the open dialogue with people from all sections of this community. Bring our religious leaders, our mothers and fathers, our single mothers and fathers, our grandparents, to bring about a historical perspective of where they came from, the trials and tribulations that they had to go through in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s. Marry that to what some of our young people are going through today. Bring in the non-Black members and voices of a community. And I'm not talking about necessarily starting with the mayor, but people in our very civic organizations in our neighborhoods, bringing them to cut together and saying, here's the reality of it. In 1955, when this happened in Arkansas, and in 2020, when this happened in Minnesota, what has happened or what has not happened that has eliminated what happened 55, 65 years ago that's leading to the same issues today. There's the start. And it starts with communication and earnestly talking.
What have you said to your friends who have come up to you over the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks since the murder in the streets in Minneapolis, and have said, I don't understand. What have I missed? How did it get this bad? Is it really baked into our laws? Is it really baked into our society? How have you answered those questions?
Yes and no. Is there a hidden word that says, if they're black, you can get by with it? I would have to say in some places and in some minds, yes. And then we go back to, do Black Lives Matter? They better, because if not, you're going to have 4 police officers sitting behind bars looking at potentially, their freedoms for the rest of their life being taken away because they failed to act, failed to speak when they saw something wrong, and now they're bottled in with the person who committed a crime. And I'm just using that as an example. Mm-hmm. Systemic racism and prejudices have been there and will continue to be there. We have to chip away at it one person at a time. And for when it comes to my profession, that starts with a hiring process. And we have got to be more vigilant and diligent about really gauging the mindset of the person who sits on the other side of the interview board, and have to ask those questions. Why really do you want to become a police officer? What is your purpose? Do you really want to be a servant in your community? Or are you driven by the authority of the badge that says, I have the ability, if necessary, not only to restrict someone's freedom, but to take their life if necessary? Or do you want that person who says, if it's necessary, instead of arresting somebody, instead of having to engage in physical engagement with someone, we can talk it out? Because unfortunately, too many times we look for an immediate solution to a problem that has long time been brewing and will have long time ramifications. And if we spend more time and train officers to spend more time speaking through a situation, talking through a situation to resolve it, not just immediately, but on the long term, we will see fewer and fewer incidents like Minneapolis and other places. But there again, that goes back to the training offered and the ongoing training of those officers. Let the gun just be a part of your uniform. Let the badge be something that you respect, more so than causing somebody to respect you because you're wearing a badge.
As a police officer, and my father was a police officer,
right,
had conversations with me about how I needed to act with police officers, but also stressed the fact that depending on where I was in some of the suburbs around me, I needed to be more cautious. I needed to make sure I was not necessarily at the speed limit, but maybe a mile under the speed limit. How did you have those conversations with your kids, but particularly with your son? Or did you? As a Black man, did you feel it necessary to have the conversations?
Yes, I did. Had it with my son and my daughter, in fact. And sometimes, Eric, it doesn't matter. You're a father. Sometimes we can say all we want till we're blue in the face. And just to paraphrase a scripture in the Bible, train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from those ways. Simply put, if we teach our children, what is right and what is wrong, ultimately, they leave the venue of our home and they go out into the world on their own. A lot of us make mistakes. None of us are perfect. None of us are beyond making mistakes, okay? But ultimately, it is the teaching that you heard from your mother, your father, your grandmother that ultimately comes back to life. And I remember this. And hopefully, it comes at a point where it's not too late. I'm having more conversations today now than ever before in my life with young people on how to act and how to respond, especially young people of color. And being very real, I tell them, you are at a disadvantage. In your own mind, you're thinking that police officer, when he turns his or her lights on you, that they're coming after you because of the color of your skin. In fact, it may be because your tail light is out or because your license plates are expired. But you're thinking that they're coming at you because of the color of your skin. So, my fellow young brothers and sisters, this is how we should always respond. This is the way that I do it at 59 years old when I'm getting stopped on Interstate 70. That is, I don't make any sudden movements. I place my hands in plain view. I have my stuff ready. I let that police officer come up and say, "Good afternoon. My name is Officer Smith. I'm with the Podunk Police Department. The reason I'm stopping you is because your license plates are expired. You may not be aware of that. Did you fail to put the sticker on your license plates?" "Officer, I got it the other day. Here, I've got the sticker right here." "Well, here, let me go put it on for you." Okay? Situation resolved. Do not become confrontational. Do not become confrontational. The difference of the scenario that I gave you and this scenario, it's 2:00 in the morning. I stop you because your tail light is out. You may not know most people don't know their tail lights are out, okay? If it goes out. Headlights are a different thing. Tail lights are different. I walk up. "Hello, my name is Officer Smith. I'm from Podunk." "What the this is bullshit. I'm getting chicken top, blah, blah," and it escalates. It potentially escalates to what could simply be, "Hey, go ahead and get your taillight fixed. Make sure you get that taken care of. See you later." To a point where that police officer now may be calling for an assist unit because that person is becoming verbally aggressive and combative, okay? That's a real world that we live in, Eric, because it takes the officer of today who has strong enough courage to say, "I'm going to let that person vent. I'm going to let them speak. And then I'm going to say, if you're finished now, if I can finish, I just wanted to stop you to let you know that your tail light is out." "Oh man, I'm sorry." When I've engaged in those types of incidents and let them vent, sometimes I ask them, "Are you mad at me or are you mad that I'm stopping you? I'm going to let you finish. And when you get done, can I tell you why I stopped you?" And a lot of times they'll tell me, and I had it happen today, "Well, I've had a bad history with police officers." "Sir, ma'am, I've never met you before. Young man, I've never met you before. So please do not group me into the category of what you previously experienced, just like you don't want me grouping you into a category."
You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're down to our last 8-9 minutes with Aaron Stevens. Before we move on to the topic of cuffs, and people keep asking me about that show and when it's going to be back and be regular, we lost Jim Branham, who, and I spent 19 years on the Police Merit Commission. I've had a chance to work with a number of different chiefs in the department. You obviously have been with the police department for a long time and probably worked very closely with Chief Branham. I want to know if you had any words that you wanted to put out there.
Let me catch myself here for a moment. Because Jim Branham has been my friend for almost 45 years. We first met each other in the mid-'70s working at MCL Cafeteria. He and his wife Pam and we all worked together from then. So Jim and I have been friends for that long in my life. I've worked, I believe now, I am under my 10th police chief. And I will say from the bottom of my heart, I had the opportunity to serve under Jim these 4+ years as chief of police, and I could not have asked for a better servant leader. He was not Chief Branham. He was Jim Branham, who happened to be chief of police, and he would tell you that. He was not driven by the eagles that were on his collar, indicating chief of police, but this is a man who really saw that his position, the higher he got in rank, the more humble he became and realized that he had to serve in a better capacity. And when we lost him as not only chief of police, but when we lost him recently and his journey came to an end, it's a huge loss for this community. And unless you knew Jim, you don't know how much of an impact he has had on this community, our policing, the forward thinking and engaging with the community in the most amiable manner. This community will never know that. But those of us who worked with him, those of us who knew him, those of us who loved him, we know.
Okay. Cuffs is a program that has been on WCTV since long before I started, and you were not the first host of that show, were you?
No. A man named Gary Osborne and my mentor, John Carrico, both of them were some of the original host of that. And Cuffs came about as a result of a crime wave that was going on back, 30 years ago. They determined, let's get some public input. Let's put this out to the public. Through that, the show Cuffs eventually was built and became a regular staple. I came on to assist John Carrico, who is now retired and has been long retired. And I learned from John about the Cuffs program, and I took great pleasure in assisting him. When John retired, he came to me and says, Aaron, I don't want this to end. I want you to take over. And so, when he left, I did. One of the first things I wanted to do, too, is go from from being, so to speak, a police show talking about how 911 calls are dispatched or this or that. I wanted to have an engaging community conversation. This is why the format became that of community issues, community guests, talking about things that were happening in the community. That just happened to focus around also borderline with people that were wanted on outstanding warrants. We still do discuss police issues, but I wanted to engage the community with bigger picture things. And unfortunately, over the last year and a half plus, my responsibilities with the Richmond Police Department as a training officer and everything else have prevented me from having regularly scheduled Cuffs shows like I did, in the first 13, 14, 15 years. It is my earnest desire to get back to, because I get asked it every time.
I'm glad you do, because I know I do.
Yeah, and I want to, because believe me, I love that show. I love it. I don't love it because my face is in front of the camera. I love it because I get to bring people on the show who otherwise may not have a voice in the public to talk about events or issues that are going on. And it gives them a public voice. And then immediately I start hearing back from people to say, man, I love that. I learned from it. And I really miss that. And now that we are almost at near capacity on the police department and back at full manpower strength, once this pandemic is over and WCTV opens up that we can start doing things in studio or doing that, I'm now assured by my supervisors, I can get back to doing that on a regular basis.
Okay. We are looking forward to that.
Not as much as me.
We'll see.
Not me, Eric.
We are down to our last couple of minutes, and I am going to end this the way that I started it. We've gone through this hour, and there may have been topics that you thought I would touch on that we haven't had a chance. There may have been things that you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to. So I'm going to open up the floor, and I am going to let you kind of take us out of here. What is it that you want to say to your community? Because you grew up here. You've been on the school board for 6 terms. You've been a police officer for 30 plus years. What do you want your community to know?
Ladies and gentlemen, when you see a police officer, in spite of everything that's going on, you can make a difference in making our community safe and bridging the gaps between trust and or misguided trust. If you see us, don't run away from us. Walk up to us, say hi, reach your hand out, shake it. And again, as I've said so many times, I think that you would be surprised that that police officer, man or woman, is going to appreciate more than you can imagine that extended hand. And when you say thank you or officer, do you have a moment? I'd like to talk with you. And even be candid. Come up to us, say, as you said earlier, Eric, hey, Officer Stevens, I don't understand. I don't get it. Why is this happening? I don't care if you're black or white. Come up and say that, because we'll never get to that end point together until we reach the commonality of communicating. I can understand you. You can understand me. We may differ in some of our opinions on things, but if we can agree to work together to reach that common goal of making this a unified community, then everything that we've talked about, recruiting of black teachers, having a safer community, a trusting community, a community where police officers and citizens walk hand in hand to make this a better place to live and raise our children, then that's what it's going to be. And it starts with hello. It starts with the handshake instead of the fist. It starts with compassion of the heart and not by the authority of the badge. And for you to be willing to engage in the communication. There is a man named Danny Gokey, Gokey. Look him up. He has a song. It is called Love God, Love People, Love People. Love God, love people. If you can first love God and focus on God, then everything after that comes into effect. You can't love God without loving your brother and sister, regardless of their color and skin. And you can't hate your brother and sister and say that you love God. Love God, love people. We can work this out together.
Aaron, thanks for being on this week's In Focus.
Eric, thank you for having me.